Hello everybody and welcome to our fifth video in our series of videos on the age of exploration. So last time we looked at really the biggest negative of the Portuguese exploration of Western Africa, and that was the establishment of the slave trade network. We also met Bartolomeu Diaz, who reached the southernmost point of Africa in 1488, and this brings us nicely onto today's video about the sailor Vasco da Gama, who built on Diaz's journey and reached India in 1498. So, as always with our learning outcomes, by the end of this presentation, you should know what a now or a Carrack is. You should be able to give an account of Vasco da Gama's journey, and you should know at least two results of Portugal's voyages to Africa and Asia. So, on the 8th of July 1497, da Gama and a crew of around 170 men set sail on 4 ships on an expedition to reach India and to try to secure trade agreements for valuable goods and spices. Da Gama sailed on his flagship, the San Gabriel, which was a Carrack or a now ship. So up until now, all the explorations along the west coast of Africa had taken place using these caravel ships we were talking about, which were lightweight. But the Carrack, or the now flagship, used by da Gama, was a larger ship. That it was more stable on heavy seas, and it was more profitable because you could carry a lot more cargo and provisions on it. So these ships had large structures at the front and at the back, known as castles, for better defence. And as I said, there were about 170 sailors on it. Of that would have consisted of officers who came from like the higher classes of society, and then sailors who came from the lower classes of society. So da Gama followed Diaz's route, but he didn't stay as close to the coast, and in November 1497 he rounded the tip of Africa and he was sailing into unknown waters. In December he landed in Mozambique, where they were unwelcome and they had to retreat to their ship, and they bombarded the port of Mozambique from the ship. They then sailed up to MOMBASA, where they attacked unarmed Arab trading vessels for goods, kind of like early pirates, and this angered the people of MOMBASA, because at the time there wasn't really any piracy in the Indian Ocean trading network. In April of 1498, da Gama made it up to this place called Malindi. And the people of Malindi were at war with MOMBASA, who da Gama had annoyed and attacked, and they agreed to help him to reach India by providing a guide, and they also signed a trade treaty with da Gama. So on the 20th of May 1498, da Gama and his fleet sailed into the port of Calicut. As you can see here, Calicut is in India. So they sailed in there on the 20th of May. But the leader in Calicut, he was unimpressed with da Gama's gifts, and they didn't sign a trade treaty with da Gama. But da Gama left in 1498 carrying cargo nearly 60 times the cost of the expedition. So he had paid for the cost of the expedition 60 times over. The journey home was quite arduous. As you can see from the zigzagging in the sea, it was a tough trip home. 117 of the 170 sailors who set sail with da Gama died on the trip, including his brother. One of the big killers on the ships was scurvy. So this was a disease. It was caused by a lack of vitamin C, which sailors wouldn't get from the dried food on the ships, which were primarily these salty ship's biscuits, which were cooked on the deck in a firebox. So scurvy, it caused sore gums, it caused teeth to fall out, it caused vomiting and weakness, that in many cases led to death. So in September of 1499, da Gama returned to Lisbon and he came back a hero. Even though he didn't get a trade treaty with Calicut, King Manuel I made him Admiral of the Indian Seas, and he immediately sent another expedition under the leadership of a man named Pedro Cabral, who we will kind of meet in a future video. Cabral actually on this journey accidentally discovers Brazil by sailing far too far west. But the Muslim traders, they ran Cabral and his men out of Calicut. And then in 1502, Da Gama set sails for India again, and he starts using excessive force to make the leader of Calicut sign a trade treaty. One of the strongest aspects of the Indian Ocean trade network is that it was extremely well regulated, with very little piracy. They didn't police or anything like that. However, so one of the strongest aspects of the Indian Ocean trading network is that it was extremely well regulated, with very little piracy. There was no need for police. However, all that changed with the arrival of Portugal, who used brute force and ignorance to force their way into this trading network. So after Da Gama had arrived home in 1499, more than a dozen expeditions carrying 7,000 men with lots of gunpowder forced their way into the Indian Ocean trading network. Armed with this gunpowder, they conquered Hormuz in 1507, which is a choke point for all the trade that goes through the Persian Gulf. Even to this day, there's huge amounts of oil are shipped there. They conquered Goa in India in 1510, and then they conquered Malacca, and they conquered a spice hub in 1511. They set up trading posts and forts in all these places, attempting to run a kind of a monopoly on trade through the Indian Ocean. In 1513, Jorge Alves became the first European ever to sail to China, landing in Guangzhou, and these actions brought Portugal an enormous amount of wealth. So, while we will briefly be mentioning this man Pedro Cabral and his finding of Brazil again, this brings an end to our study of Portugal's contribution to the age of exploration. We followed the life's works of Prince Henry the Navigator, Bartolomeu Diaz, and Vasco da Gama. We've seen advances in shipbuilding techniques, and we've seen the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade network, to name a few of the things. Now we're going to look at some of the major results of these Portuguese voyages. So the first major result is that Portugal took control of the spice trade between Asia and Europe, which up until then had been controlled by the Arab merchants. A second consequence or a result of it was they increased the amount of spices that were coming into Europe, causing the price of the spices to drop dramatically. And this affected places such as Venice, which had been distributed in spices from the Arab merchants up until this point. And finally, Portugal established a large empire, spreading their language and culture. So again, to go over our learning outcomes, you should know what a nau or a carrack is. So you should know it is a larger ship with larger castles at the front and the side that could hold more cargo. You should be able to give an account of Da Gama's journey to India, and you should know at least two results of Portugal's voyages to Africa and Asia: the establishment of a Portuguese empire, Portugal taking control of the spice trade in Asia, and an increase in the amount of spices coming into Europe, causing prices to drop. That's the end of the presentation. Hope you got something from the video.